We will never turn our back on a single Scot.
We've got to wrestle with those challenges.
This is the same nonsense we have heard time and time again.
This is our country. Let's fix it together.
Hello and welcome to Planet Holyrood. I'm Paul Hutcheon, political editor of the Daily Record. I'm joined this week by a cast of thousands. We've got John Ferguson, who's the editor of the Sunday Mail. We've got Douglas Dickey of the Scottish Daily Express. And of course, Mark Smith, a.k.a. Smitty, who's the head of news at the Daily Record. So let's talk about Trump's trip to Scotland. He was there for 5 days. I think we all predicted it was going to be crazy. He didn't let us down in that regard. He flew in on Air Force One, had a couple of days at Turnberry, and then he flew to, I think it was at Lossiemouth or maybe Aberdeen, where he went to the Many Estate and had another couple of days there. It's hard to know where to start because there were so many stories from it, so many bizarre moments. I mean, I think politically, the main event was probably the press conference with the Prime Minister, Keir Starmer, at Turnberry. And I mean, I think there were probably about 15 separate news lines in terms of what Trump said. As ever with the president, it was just a stream of consciousness of nonsense interspersed with bizarre compliments and insults. And I'm just trying to summarise it. He clearly hates the London Mayor, Sadiq Khan, because he had a pop at him. He wants oil and gas to continue, basically drill, baby, drill. He does not like renewable energy projects, which I think goes back to the construction of the golf course in Aberdeenshire. And of course, he said effectively no indyref2 for 75 years. So, John, it was a bit of a hoot all round.
Yeah, I mean, a press conference with Donald Trump's a bit like watching an episode of The Muppet Show, and the world's media then has to try to sort of seriously talk about these completely insane narratives that he makes the talking points. The takeaways, I would think, was that he seems to quite like Keir Starmer at the moment, but of course we know that that can change very quickly with Donald Trump. We also know that he's a completely transactional kind of guy. Like, you might think you're getting on with him, but whether that ever does you any good in terms of trade deals, another question. Let's face it, Donald Trump is a pretty horrible, narcissistic guy. Someone that if he was in your own private life, you would probably want him out of it, and it would probably require the police to do that. Unfortunately, he's now the president of America, so he's in all our lives, whether we want it or not. And, you know, I think we just need to try and keep our head down until he leaves.
I thought that bit where you had the Prime Minister and the President on the steps of Turnberry, flanked by Keir Starmer's wife, I thought she looked quite uncomfortable because Trump just could not shut his mouth and you didn't know what he was going to say. It was all quite awkward, but I think that in the final analysis, Starmer will probably be quite happy. He didn't really get a public spanking. Okay, there was no trade deal done and dusted in terms of getting it over the line, but it was always going to be a tricky thing to navigate. He'll probably be broadly satisfied.
Yeah, I think so. Didn't Trump also make some weird compliment about Starmer's wife or something?
Twice.
She was really respected in America and whatnot. It was, I'm sure she is.
I didn't know Keir Starmer's wife was big in America,
no,
but that's...
Neither did I. That huge in Japan, that used to be the thing, didn't it? But well, I think both of them will be quite happy. I think when you kind of cut through the nonsense, of which there was a lot, for me, the main takeaway from the entire weekend was Trump kind of reiterating his, belief that Israel should open, Gaza up to humanitarian aid. That for me is the main takeaway. And this is the thing about Trump: if occasionally you cut away, let's be honest, the crap, there's every so often there's like a nugget of wisdom in it, and I think that was his nugget of wisdom away from this. The rest of it to me was just a sideshow. I mean, ultimately, who really cares about Donald Trump's opinion and when there should be an ex-independence referendum? It's not in his gift to give or take away. He's just a guy who's, entitled to his opinion on it. Stuff like that, I think, was a bit of a sideshow. It made a decent headline, but, when we look back in this, I don't think that's what, MD's going to be kind of looking back and saying that was the main takeaway from the weekend.
Smitty, minor earthquake, nobody dead. Is that your takeaway?
Well, I think last week we all thought it would be a circus, and he being the clown. But I think after the event, it was more like the court of a medieval king, with Starmer and Swinney playing the court jester to his overlord, shtick that he was trying to play. It seems mad to me that the American president visits his private business interests in Scotland, and it's only right that Swinney and Starmer turn up and pay their respects to him. But for him to host them in that way, I felt was grossly insulting to Starmer and Swinney. They bit their tongue. They did what they had to do for the interests of their own people, the people in Scotland and the people in the wider UK. But that must have really grated.
Do you think it was worth the $6 million in policing costs?
I feel sorry for every police officer that had to spend any time down there. That must have been an absolute nightmare. But they were probably on double time. I'm not going to shed too many tears for these lads. But the key thing is that it shouldn't be the case that a US president, no matter their background, can come to another country and lord it like he did. And sadly, Swinney and Starmer had no choice but to genuflect before their master. And it was a humiliation, I think, for them both. However, they've done well, I think, both of them, to charm him, because he's a man who responds well to flattery. He's a man who's deluded about himself in many regards, but he definitely likes people who big him up. That's what obviously makes him very, that's what gives him pleasure in life. And as for his, comments about women and about Starmer's wife, she's absolutely right to be uncomfortable in his presence. I think any woman should be uncomfortable in his presence. And certainly I think for Starmer and Swinney, they just had to, they did well, I think, to bite the bullet. And if we come out of this with reduced tariffs on whiskey and possibly other deals that Starmer might be able to extract on even like aircraft components and such like, there's minutiae in these deals which are quite important, then, it's job done.
So, come to Swinney. It could have been a disaster for him, this 5-day trip, given that he backed Kamala Harris last year. And in the wake of that, after Trump won, I think Eric Trump, his son, accused Swinney of being nasty in backing his Democratic rival. So, Trump could have arrived with a grudge, but there does seem to have been this improbable and unlikely bromance, which was forged, I think, was it the Monday night at the Many Estate, where Swinney was sat with Trump for a couple of hours, and there was a bit of personal small talk, and then they got down to things like whiskey tariffs. They then had a breakfast the day after. It was basically a family breakfast with the Trumps, and they invited Swinney into that, and that again went down. And, after that, Trump was basically at the Many Estate to open a third golf course. And he arrived on the first tee, he gave a wee speech, and then he basically lavished praise on the First Minister. And we're going to just listen to that just now, because it was a pretty extraordinary moment, given how difficult this weekend could have been for the First Minister.
I also want to thank your First Minister who's here. John, would you stand up? John Swinney, who's a terrific guy and loves golf and loves the people of this country, and we really appreciate it. You're really a very special guy. Thank you very much for everything, John.
Terrific, and a very special guy, and also someone who loves golf. I think I've covered John Swinney's career for over 20 years. I don't think I've ever heard him talking about golf. I don't think I've ever seen him on a golf course. I asked him about this afterwards. I said, hey, what about this love of golf that you've kept to yourself? And he said, I'm aware of golf. So I think Trump was maybe pushing Swinney's love of golf just a little bit. But if you're the FM and his advisors, it was a good trip for Swinney. He could have been given the Zelensky treatment, a humiliation in front of the cameras in full public view. He got the opposite, which was quite cringy praise. And it seems like, if you believe what the First Minister is saying, that the issue of whiskey tariffs is now on Trump's desk, Whether or not he puts it in the bin, I don't know, but it seems like there's now a window of opportunity between now and the second state visit in September where there might be scope for a bit of movement, maybe chiselling down the whisky tariffs a little bit from 10%. So I don't think Swinney could have achieved much as a devolved leader, but all round pretty positive.
Yeah, I mean, he does seem to have, by all accounts, John Swinney's got out the family album and showed him a few photographs of his son's golf swing, and Trump said, "Yeah, that's a pretty good swing he's got there."
That's all you need to do.
I read with interest the story that the Scottish government had given £180,000 to a golf competition that's going to be happening at Trump's new golf course,
which coincided with the president's trip. A remarkable
it just happened
coincidence.
they made that announcement in the morning, probably a few minutes before Trump made his effusive praise. The Sunday Mail reported that this £180,000 of our money was given despite the fact the prize pot in this golf competition is about £2 million. So, I mean, it looks like John Swinney's gone in, he's met him, he's said the right things. Trump's saying he likes him. To be honest, whether that'll make much difference to whether we reduce the tariffs in whisky, let's wait and see. I suspect that the tariff will be reduced if it's good for Donald Trump, and it won't be if it's not. And that ultimately what the First Minister has done is gone and helped Donald Trump launch his golf course, which, as you pointed out, it really is incredible that I think even, you see, like, the way that standards in public life are shifting globally. I think even in Donald Trump's first term in office, there was a sort of questions over whether he could keep his business interests and whether he had to release his tax returns and all that sort of stuff. Now, a few years later, he's, turning up in Air Force One with the full entourage to essentially launch a golf course that he's going to make a lot of money out of, and he's managed to rope in the Prime Minister and the First Minister to help him do it.
Yeah, if you're the First Minister's advisors, Dougie, would you be happy with the last few days?
Yeah, I think from a Scottish Government point of view, it's been a good few days. I mean, I will say, but obviously I'm a bit of a golf fan, so I'm a wee bit biased when it comes to stuff like this. But I believe this tournament's quite a major event, and I think I don't really see any problem with public money going to it. Public money goes to sporting events all over the country.
A major event that was happening anyway. I mean, usually you give the money to attract the event.
But anyway, sorry. Going back to the original point, I think the Scottish Government will be quite happy. How this plays with John Swinney's party support and within John Swinney's party, I think is going to be a much more interesting question. I mean, ultimately, Swinney was never going to get a great deal out of this. It could have been a disaster for him, but it was never going to be magical for him. And in the end, he's avoided the disaster. But from the party point of view, especially those on the left of the party who only see the world, everyone's either, it seems to me, you either hate Donald Trump or you love Donald Trump. Everything's black and white or orange, I suppose, in this case. But a lot in the SNP are very much in the, hate Donald Trump side, and to see their First Minister, to see their leader schmoozing up to him, getting the family album out, pretending he likes golf. I don't know how that's going to play with his key vote, especially in the Central Belt. Maybe not so much in Aberdeenshire, in places like Ayrshire, where I think Trump remains quite popular because of the impact of his golf courses. But certainly the Central Belt, I don't think it'll have went down well with his...
I think that's a fair point. I mean, Smitty, he's already struggling with his left flank. Mary Black quit recently, citing concerns over various issues. And people like her are not going to be happy with him kowtowing to, one of the most right-wing leaders in the world.
There's certainly a constituency within the SNP who will not take kindly to this bromance that we witnessed between Swinney and Trump. But if it is a bromance, it's a very one-sided bromance. It reminds me of the Silent Night bed advert where you had the wee fluffy chick in bed with a big massive hippo. Do you remember that one? And I think we all know in this bromance who's the wee fluffy chick and who's the big, massive, dangerous hippo. And when you get in bed with a big, dangerous hippo, then there's a good chance you'll get crushed, you know. And I think Swinney might come to regret within his own party his flourishing friendship with Trump. And there will be people on the SNP, certainly on the left of the SNP, who think that he's done a disservice to Scotland. Really, I think a more reasonable view will prevail. And I think most people like John Swinney. I think they realise he's an honest guy, and I think they know he's got Scotland's best interests at heart. I think the likes of Mary Black, there is a wing in the SNP which is, I think, not particularly left-wing, but is quite performative. You know, they like to jump on bandwagons, and it's all about identity politics. They didn't have a class analysis of politics, but they like to jump on every bandwagon going. Mary Black, to me, represented that particular wing of the party. And I think there'll be many in the SNP who will say good riddance, good luck with your comedy career. It's unclear when it started, to be honest. I think most people in the SNP will probably see that Swinney was being pragmatic, and he'll get away with it.
So on Air Force One, going back to the States, he did have one parting shot at an old enemy, Nicola Sturgeon. This is what he was quoted saying. I thought she was terrible as a First Minister in Scotland, but I think John is doing a very good job as First Minister. It's like that. John. It's now John.
I like how I also completely ignored Humza Yousaf. It was actually a First Minister between Nicola Sturgeon and John Swinney, which shows you the impact he had during his brief tenure.
I mean, he had a massive falling out with Salmond over the golf course and the offshore wind turbines, but he seems to have a real bee in his bonnet about Sturgeon. I think she represents everything that he despises, the sort of so-called wokery, the identity politics. He just... I was talking to someone, I don't think he was even asked about Sturgeon. I think it came out unprompted.
I'm led to believe from Nicola's people that she is entirely clear that the feeling is mutual. And I think that's not surprising.
I've got a source close to Sturgeon said the feeling was entirely mutual.
Yes.
Of course, Nicola Sturgeon said she didn't want him in Scotland when she was First Minister. But interestingly, John Swinney said that he wanted Trump to be banned. He didn't want his second state visit to happen just a few weeks ago, but he's skillfully changed course on that.
Yeah,
I think we're all real interested in what Nicola Sturgeon thinks of John Swinney and how he's doing. I think that'd be the real...
I think that'll probably come on the 14th of August.
Yeah.
With our memoirs. Yeah. So, as I said, I was at the many estates yesterday. It was some day. I mean, I'm not a Trump fan at all. I think he's a sleazy, disgraced felon. But, seeing him up close... I can see why some people like him, and I can see his appeal to some folk. I mean, he walked onto this new golf course, onto the first tee. He said a few words, and then he took the first shot on the first tee, and it was a really good shot down the fairway. And I was just thinking of like politicians generally who are so stage managed. Can you imagine like a Scottish politician in front of the media, doing such a thing on a golf course? I mean, you could easily have hooked the shot, you could have sliced it, made a complete fool of yourself, and he just did it and walked down the fairway. And I don't know, the guy has got pretty incredible self-confidence. He's someone who is entirely comfortable in his own skin.
I've got to say,
he's a horrible guy, but there's no doubt he's a force of nature.
It's easy to do that though when you've got a caddy waiting 300 yards up the fairway to just drop one. Oh, right up the middle again, Donald.
I did love that story. This cheating scandal at Turnberry. I mean, I think that's maybe a metaphor for his politics as well.
I did read though. I read quite an interesting interview with a guy who'd played golf with him, and he said the reason he says he's quite open about it. He says, "I'm going to cheat," but his reason being is that he assumes everyone else is cheating him. So his first word, he was partnering this guy at Winged Foot in America, and he said, he's going to cheat, I'm going to cheat, so you better cheat as well. and our aim is to beat these cheaters and out-cheat them. So that's his kind of philosophy.
He takes that approach to politics as well.
He sees the world as a war of everyone against everyone, and he needs to be the victor. But that perfectly encapsulates modern capitalism, doesn't it, Dougie?
Well... Sorry, Paul.
Look, it'll be over in 3 years, unless, of course, he tries to engineer it so he gets a third term.
Which it may well.
So let's just move on from Trump. There was another big story this week. John Swinney used his column in the Daily Record to set out his thinking on what constitutes the trigger for indyref2. Basically, he said that the SNP would need to win an outright majority themselves for there to be a mandate. This is a shift from the Sturgeon position. She basically argued that a pro-independence majority of the SNP and Greens would be enough, but Swinney's saying no, it has to be the SNP on their own. This is essentially a lifting. This is making it harder for the SNP to get a second referendum, because this is raising the bar on the trigger. And if you look at all the opinion polls, none of them are showing the SNP coming close to an outright majority. So, I mean, I think Swinney's thinking is that outcome in 2011 under Salmond led to the referendum 3 years later. Therefore, the unionist parties will be unable to say no. I can see his logic, but I think they will say no, even if that does happen.
I mean, the logic's entirely flawed, isn't it? The problem is that John Swinney has no control over what the trigger for a referendum is. Keir Starmer has that control, and I don't think there's any chance in hell that there's going to be a referendum whether the SNP win a majority or there's a independent supporting majority or not. I think the reason there was a referendum previously, well, there was a whole bunch of factors, wasn't there? But you had two things. You had a very forceful First Minister in Alex Salmond at the time, who was just very good and skillful at manipulating the UK political scene. He was a bit of a force of nature, like Trump, I guess, in that sense. But the other thing was that the UK government didn't think there was any conceivable chance that they would lose a referendum, and in fact they didn't. But at the moment, if you believe opinion polls, they would suggest that if there was another referendum today, then you would be starting from a position of 50-50 rather than 30-70 or worse. And I think that is the main reason why there is just not going to be another referendum, because the UK government would know that there was a very good chance that they would lose it. And really the thing that will determine whether there is one or not will be the point at which it just becomes a sort of democratic outrage to the Westminster establishment that they're not allowing one. I guess it's when you
because they're not outraged just now, are they?
Yeah,
I mean, there's 50% of the population support independence, but you don't get the impression that 50% of the country right now is outraged that there's no indyref2.
Yeah, and I also think, I mean, so there was always this thing about a generation. What is a generation? Well, if a generation is roughly when, you know, people who weren't born when the last one happened and are now of voting age, then I think that at the moment, Labour can just say, no, not now, not ever. If Labour or whoever wins the next Westminster election, you know, there has to be a point where that just begins to become offensive to people. If there is still, a majority of people, or 50% of the people in Scotland who want a referendum. So the truth is, it's not in John Swinney's hands, and there's nothing really that he can do to win that referendum.
Dougie, obviously the Express is staunchly pro-union. See, when you read his column and you saw what he was saying, is part of you not relieved in the sense that there's just no prospect of the SNP winning outright majority at this stage? It just seems completely improbable.
It almost feels like he's kind of wanting to put it to bed. It's almost like he doesn't want it. He doesn't want the referendum because, right away, what he said, his column was fundamentally dishonest because it's not in his gift to give. It's not in Holyrood's gift to give, which has been settled at the Supreme Court. So, I mean, what is this? It's not even Plan B, it's Plan Z. We're in Plan number...
Yeah, they've gone through various iterations
de facto
of
referendums. It's getting tiresome. And I think even though I said earlier that Donald Trump's opinion on indyref2 is irrelevant, it is. Although I actually happen to think he was right on it. The biggest problem with this, Scotland cannot move forward while there's a constant threat of this. The UK can't move forward while there's a constant threat of this.
Well, it's a contested issue. I mean, half the
Well,
population.
it wasn't.
leave
It was. You know, both sides vowed to, honour the result back in 2014, and yet within hours of the result coming in, the yes side had already reneged
Is
on
that it forever?
So, and the other thing I would say is John makes a point. It's like 50-50. It's 50-50 on what was a completely biased question. Every piece of evidence suggests if you
Well, I mean,
word
the question was approved by the Electoral Commission.
If you word the question differently, the result is differently. If you talk about leave, remain, do we leave the UK, do we remain in the UK? The answers are differently. It's been, that's been proven.
Well, look, I mean, I think the question was approved by the Electoral Commission.
But
I've never heard
it doesn't
anyone
mean it's
accusing
not
them of being
biased.
a biased.
I think the question
body.
is definitely biased. Definitely.
I think if you change it, then there's an accusation of bias. If you remember, like the Tories, Labour, Lib Dems, they all agreed to that question.
Well, it was
as well.
complete.
It's the same question we've been asking for.
We look
20
now.
years, isn't it?
Cameron. We talked about David Cameron. You're right. It was total. I mean, what? David Cameron should be ashamed of himself for that. There was no outcry for a referendum back then at all. And the only reason we're here now is because he let it happen. And that's why we're still stuck in this constant constitutional merry-go-round. And we've got John Swinney again ignoring the NHS, ignoring all the devolved powers he's got.
I don't think it's fair to say they're ignoring it. I mean, I think they're trying and failing. They're not ignoring it.
And it's obviously just, red meat to, maybe the people in the SNP that are peed off that he met Donald Trump. He says,
I'm not sure that Neil Gray wakes up and has an empty diary. They're not ignoring the NHS. Clearly, their policies are not working.
No.
They could be doing a lot better. But I think this
is
it's a caricature to say that the only thing they're thinking about is independence. It's not true.
This is the best they can offer. This is the best they can offer their supporters. And it's something that they can't follow through in. For me, and I don't know what the route is, it's a completely different question. We could be here all day discussing it. But the route for the SNP to independence must be through Westminster, if that's what they want. Holyrood does not have the constitutional power for it. And to suggest otherwise is to be fundamentally dishonest with the electorate.
Smitty, I think what was interesting about the column was the negative reaction it got from people in his own party.
Yeah.
Joanna Cherry, I think she's still in the SNP, and others just felt like it was a cynical exercise. And he's tabling an amendment. He might have tabled the amendment for a conference later in the year, and clearly there's going to be a vote on it. And you would imagine, given that he is leader, it will be approved. But it doesn't feel like this has been the sort of call to arms that maybe some of his supporters were expecting.
I think there's, he is known as honest, John, but I think he is also a cunning politician. Had to get that one right. He has calculated, I think, that the next election, the next Holyrood election, will be beneficial for the SNP and him if they can coalesce all independent supporters behind his party and vote accordingly, both on the list and in the constituency. I know a lot of people who support independence might lend their vote to the Greens, they might lend their vote to Alba. I know I'm hearing Alba might have some pretty good candidates in some key areas.
Really?
So that could be quite interesting, I mean, Tommy Sheridan's in the mix there in Glasgow.
I thought you said some good candidates.
Yeah, great candidate. He would get in, I'm telling you. I think Swinney's calculated he needs to coalesce every independent supporter. And there's loads of them in the Labour Party as well. He wants to coalesce them behind the SNP, and he's desperate for this next election to be about independence. He's desperate for it not to be about the fact that your granny can't get her hip replacement. He doesn't want it to be about the fact your kids can't get resources at their local schools. He doesn't want it to be about councils and the local services being decimated by the council tax freeze. He's desperate for it not to be about that. So in coalescing all the independents, supporting people behind the SNP and trying to move the ground towards the Constitution away from their abject failures on public services, I think he's playing a game there that might actually work.
It's interesting you say that, Smitty, that that he's wanting to make it about independence to kind of deflect from all these other failures. He made the general election about independence. Line 1, page 1 of the manifesto, and they get absolutely decimated.
They did, and I think there was such a groundswell of desire to get rid of the Tories apart from the Express, of course, I think that just didn't work. I think he's hoping he'll pull off the same trick again, and it might work this time.
I do feel a bit sorry for John Swinney in that he seems to either be obsessed with independence or he doesn't really want it.
Well, the truth is,
It's almost like part of the basis can't be appeased regardless.
I follow quite closely the fundamentalist wing of the SNP are the people who are desperate for independence tomorrow. They might have the Braveheart face paint on and that. I've yet to hear any of them come up with an actual, what seems like a grown-up strategy to get the independence.
Shout it louder.
I hear things like people putting these big things on the internet saying, well, why don't we just declare, like Rhodesia, unilateral declaration of independence? Why don't we get out on the streets and just campaign for it? As if these things, A, are going to happen, and B, would make any difference to Westminster.
The problem is that there is no way to get another referendum.
The UK government says no.
For Scotland.
That's it.
They say no,
But by
and
the way-
there does seem to be something a bit undemocratic about the fact that essentially it's that them saying no that is gradually destroying the SNP.
It is ironic because it is a democratic disgrace that a country, in Scotland it is a country, whether you're a unionist or a nationalist, Scotland is a nation as such, if there is such a thing. And, it should always have a route to self-determination. And for the Westminster government to turn around and say, well, we're just not having that, eventually that might grate so much that people do become outraged. Because it is an outrage, really, when you think about it.
I mean, there's many nations in the world who are, face similar breakaway separatist movements who wouldn't even have offered the referendum in the first place. So
There's not really many, but that have an established parliament for that breakaway region.
Well, it's not. I mean, the Parliament's only 25 years old. It's a devolved assembly. We've already been here with it. Is it a government? Is it an executive? I won't open that.
Let's stick with government. Let's stick with government.
Again, so we've already had that. The UK has a right to protect its integrity and allowing a part of it to leave. The same way, and I know it is different because the United States, the states were colonies and then they were states. But to all intents and purposes, when they kind of coalesced, they were countries. They were separate countries from one another. If one of them wants to leave, you wouldn't get.
So you don't you don't agree with the proposition that Scotland, the people who should decide Scotland's future are the 5 million people who live in Scotland.
I think the people who decide the UK's future should be the 70 million people.
But
you
think
Scotland's
those
not
5 million should be held
homogeneous
captive
thing.
if that's.
Oh, captive! Come on, Smith.
No, but
come on,
literally,
captive.
if it was the settled will of the Scottish people to have
I
independence.
think if we get 10 years down the line and independence is polling through the roof, then I think we need to have the conversation. But the fact is, right now it's holding us back.
But in principle,
holding us back.
In principle, who do you think should have the final say about how Scotland is governed?
Well, I think the UK government should have the final say in how the UK government
more than the Scottish people, the people who live here.
No, but
I
think we were given the choice. We opted to remain part of the UK political system, and thus.
So then it's off the table forever.
I'm seeing things from a UK perspective, whereas you only see things. Poverty stops at Berwick, apparently.
It is. I mean, we can quibble over what the opinion polls show the support for independence is, but all the opinion polls show overwhelming support for Scotland to have the right to choose. And that's not to say that you agree with independence or want it, but every opinion poll I've looked at shows that if you ask people, do you think Scotland should have the right to have another referendum at some point, people say yes.
At some point, though, I mean, well, obviously we're going to get the chance next summer, thanks to John Swinney.
That's right.
I think we've run out of time. I'm really shocked that independence has proven to be such a divisive issue on this podcast. Incredible. So thanks very much to Dougie, Mark and John for joining me, and thanks to Molly Finlay for producing this episode of Planet Holyrood. You can listen to it on Spotify or Apple Music or watch it on the Daily Record YouTube channel. Don't forget to watch us on Instagram and TikTok for the latest news and the best bits of the podcast.
Cheers.
We will never turn our back on a single Scot.
We've got to wrestle with those challenges.
This is the same nonsense we have heard time and time again.
This is our country. Let's fix it